Good, good. Well, and some, yeah, it's so interesting that our efforts to deal with just cause for very specific things in Phil, we call them for cause fiction. Instead of just cause. That is what just was being dealt with in House GovOps. Yeah.
And all over the place. There's
So you've gotten good exercises.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. Okay, we are now live. Oh, sorry, we're now live. So we are now turning to our housing bill. It's Friday. Our hope is always to deal with housing on Tuesdays and Fridays. We are now dealing with the landlord tenant bill, H 772, which is on for third reading today in the House, and will be coming to us shortly, obviously. And we started walking through it last week. And Mark Mahalle is going to come back after we finish walking through it to just chat with us, addressing some of the concerns that people had. So, and then we're going to hear, Brenda, we hear you people in the outer sphere. If you want to testify, please be in touch with Kiara. And
she emailed just now. That's why I went.
I know, but I'm speaking to all the people who we can't see. All the people who we can't see. If you're interested in testifying, please be in touch with Kiara Mead or me. Thank you. So let's finish walking through. Do you know where we stopped?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, you're right.
Okay, where did we stop?
We stopped around page 10. And I say around because I'm gonna pause and just reorient us for this section.
Yeah, if you could just recap what we've gone through already and what.
1 second, I'm just trying to waiting to get into the
Sorry.
Zoom.
If I may, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
So I have not been following what's going on in the House because we have no control over that. But I am trying to get a feel for what we have walked through. It. I understand we needs an amendment and a pro side amendment. So anything you can overlay as you're going through about what's still in flux, you appreciate it.
We'll do. So what I will do is I will walk through, I'm going to bring us back very quickly going through some of the sections that we've already looked at. I will comment where some things have changed. And then get us back to where we were. So, okay. For starters, we talked about, if you recall, dealing with the landlord-tenant relationship. There are a lot of changes in the bill that deal with the relationship when it comes to raising rents, security deposits, etc. I'll hit those again very quickly, but most of what the bill is about the ending of the landlord-tenant relationship when you have to terminate a rental agreement. What are the notice provisions that are required? How much notice do you have to give? What are the reasons that you need to have as a landlord to terminate a rental agreement? And then if you terminate the rental agreement and the individual tenant remains on the dwelling, in the dwelling, on the premises afterwards, you then subsequently have to bring the ejectment action against the individual. And how does that court process, that's a legal process that happens in the court system, how does that play out? And so just to get us back to where we were, I will start at the beginning, section 1.
And may I add, because I know Mark helped tee it up for you, but the objective here, after years of not addressing landlord-tenant and on the heels of a landlord-tenant task force that did very well articulating the challenges that are and the inadequacies of the current laws, did not make recommendations for change, which was frustrating. So Mark Mahalle and I took it on ourselves this fall to work with Cam and others to really try and address this razor edge balance of improving the eviction process for both parties and to improve it for landlords and to try and improve it and make some things clearer for tenants. So this is if we approach this, it's going to be a balancing act all the way through it. It's not easy, but it's not working now at all well. So it is an attempt to make this this very challenging process a better process, a more predictable process, and a simple process for everybody.
as I've been trying to read up on this, I see that other states, you often treat eviction as a separate thing than ejectment, and eviction being if you have a contract with somebody, then you are evicting them during that contract term, whereas ejectment is when there's no contract in place. Does our the current statute separate and define those two
No,
terms
it
differently?
No, there is a question in the termination period about whether you have a written contract, a written rental agreement or not. And current law provides a different notice period depending on whether the rental agreement is in writing. But the court process in Vermont is called ejectment. And you can think about it of being in eviction. So you would need to, the landlord would need to prove that the individual, the termination is valid if you have a written contract. If you have a written rental agreement, which is a contract.
Yeah.
State law allows for the termination of that agreement if certain conditions are met and a certain period of notice is provided. If the landlord meets the notice requirements and the reasoning behind the termination is compliant with state law, for example, non-payment of rent, you have a written contract. And if the person is not paying rent as per the written contract, the landlord can terminate the agreement by providing a certain amount of notice.
If I may follow up on that.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely.
All of this is related to some sort of either verbal or arrangement where people were given some sort of blessing to live somewhere. Is any of this also touching what I don't know the better term, like squatting or trespassing? That is a completely separate topic related to this.
There is a provision in here in this bill about trespass. But no, generally speaking, this is covering where you have and written a rental agreement is defined in the statutory section. So it's either an oral or a written agreement where an individual is renting a dwelling unit for consideration.
Thank you.
Okay, so in the effort of time, I'm going to be relatively succinct on the things that we've already gone through. Not to say I'm happy to take questions. I have little doubt we will come back to each of these, but just to get us back to where we were last Friday. If you recall, there.
Just before you start, Ken,
Yes, ma'am.
I understand because this is up for third reading on the floor right now. Do you have a notion of when it will be on the floor so we can be clear on your time frame? Because you may have to disappear at any moment.
I do not.
Would you be kind enough to be in touch with the clerk's office to find out when 198 is, when at 772 is going to come? That would be great.
I may have to step away. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I know, I'm just trying to set up.
I appreciate you reminding me. It was a condition I meant to start with my testimony. I don't think I introduced myself either. For the record, Cameron Boyd, Office of Legislative Counsel, just in case I didn't. I may need to step away if that gets taken up on the floor this morning.
We're clear.
Okay.
So, thank you. I just wanted to get a sense of when that might be, but let's make progress on.
Yep.
On this if we can.
Okay. So we talked about actual notice. In order to terminate a rental agreement, the landlord has to provide actual notice. We talked about some of the amendments here that would authorize emailing and mailing. And it would authorize posting to the door if the address of the individual is unknown. We talked about extending the rebuttable presumption, 3 to 5 days of receipt. We talked about moving to the top of page 3, provision that's being added to say that the landlord cannot increase rent more than once in a 12-month period unless the landlord is purchasing the building. Right. We talked about the residential rental application where application fees are prohibited, but this application fee is not defined. So there's a definition here. It authorizes credit check, background check for actual costs. Landlord can charge actual costs. Landlord cannot charge if the tenant is providing a current copy. If you remember, that was defined as 90 days before the application, and we had a little bit of conversation about this allows for enforcement of violations, enforcement against violations under an unfair practice in commerce. And there was some discussion about, well, could a person give a false credit report? And does that cover under a potential violation of commerce? So it's something I'm going to look into. So this, I'm reminding you all some of the discussion that we have. Security deposits. Cap on security deposits equal to 2 months rent in addition to the first month paid. Requirement that the landlord provide half of the security deposit back if the landlord is terminating the rental agreement or what can kind of colloquially be known as no cause eviction.
Right, no cause,
Right. So then we move to,
which we have reduced. Quite honestly, it now functions entirely on no cause. We are now limiting no cause considerably and creating much more for cause eviction so that is clear.
then we get into page 6. You have a section about retaliatory conduct that's prohibited, adding in that the landlord cannot retaliate against an individual who has taken legal action authorized by law against the landlord. There was an amendment on the House floor to add in here a new subsection 5 to say that a landlord cannot retaliate against an individual who contacts law enforcement to respond to an instance of domestic abuse.
Seems reasonable.
Okay, so moving page 7. Now we get into some of the meat of the bill. Termination of the tenancy and notice. So here are the amendments that are being made to change what reasoning or circumstances have to exist in order for a landlord to terminate a rental agreement. Subsection A, we discussed termination for non-payment of rent. Tenant has to pay rent when it's due without demand. If the tenant fails to pay rent, then the landlord can terminate the rental agreement because of non-payment of rent. And the proposal is to reduce the notice requirement from 14 to 10 days. Moving on to subsection B, termination for breach of the rental agreement. There are 2 separate provisions here, B1 and B2. B1 is the termination for breach of the rental agreement, current law, for failure, this is lines 17 and 18, for failure of the tenant to comply with material terms of the rental agreement or with obligations imposed under the chapter.
Sorry, Cam, just to go back to 7, and I know I suppose we should probably keep the issues that we want to talk about substantively, but I thought all people had 10 days to pay bills.
Not in this context, no. There is no grace period built into the statute. And it's not providing an individual 10 days to pay it. It's saying that if a landlord is going to terminate the rental agreement because of someone's failure to pay rent, they have to give the person 10 days notice before the termination ends. So if I hand deliver a termination notice to you today, say I'm terminating our rental agreement, you need to vacate the dwelling unit because of your failure to pay rent, I have to give you 10 days to remain in the dwelling unit before the rental agreement terminates. The B1, as I mentioned, failure of the tenant to comply with material terms or with obligations imposed. The tenant has certain obligations that are statutorily imposed on the individual. They can't damage the property. They can't disrupt, other residences, peaceful enjoyment of their property. They have to ensure that their guests do not do either of those as well, damage, disrupt others, etc. There could be terms of the rental agreement that are material. For example, these have been brought up frequently: no smoking in the unit, no allowing other individuals to reside in the unit, etc. No subleasing of the unit. Those could be material terms of the agreement that if the tenant breaks them, then the landlord can terminate the rental agreement under this section.
Can I ask, because I once introduced a bill that has never passed, just so that tenants would have to provide notice to the landlord if they were subleasing. We've never gotten to you can't sublease. We haven't even gotten to you should tell your landlord if you're subleasing.
The statute allows the landlord to prohibit subleasing.
Okay, so you're
That
right.
already exists, right? That's in current law.
Correct. but it doesn't, if I recall, and I'm just trying to pull it up and I'm gonna share it so we can walk through it. It doesn't, I don't believe it requires any sort of notice, but I want to make sure. So here, 4456B, a landlord may condition or prohibit subleasing of a dwelling unit under terms of a rental agreement. Okay, no, there it is. And may require the tenant to provide notice, not a requirement. for the
It's,
tenant to
it's
provide
not a
notice.
requirement.
Right.
Is,
That alone was like a whole bill.
relatedly, is subleasing all the same? I can think of in my district, there's a lot of people that just need to find people for the summer as opposed to leasing out for a whole year. So this is subleasing and there's no distinction between periods and length of time.
There is none,
And let's put a pin in it.
yeah,
That's a big discussion.
I'm so worried
Put a
about
pin
all
on that.
this. This is like
Yeah, no,
touching many areas of law that usually have very careful consideration.
this has had a lot of, this has been the biggest bill that's batted out of House Council. So I mean, it's had a lot of thought.
It has no commerce.
I mean, House Judging, and then out of House Judiciary. So House Judiciary took it for quite a long stretch of time. So
Okay,
why don't
so,
we keep going out, put a pin in this.
so page 7, bottom of page 7. What is being added is specific statutory language to authorize a landlord to terminate a rental agreement under B1 because of a tenant's late payment of rent more than 3 times in a 12-month period. When you go back to subsection A is about terminating the rental agreement for non-payment of rent. But there's specific language in subsection A right here on lines 8, 9, and 10 that state that a rental agreement shall not terminate if the tenant pays or tenders rent due to the end of the rental period at which payment is made. So what does that mean? That means a tenant could conceivably be late frequently. And if the landlord went to terminate the rental agreement because of non-payment of rent, and then the individual pays rent the next day, it negates the termination because the individual has now paid through that month. So the landlord may still be able to move forward with the termination, but they would have to provide another notice. They wouldn't be able to terminate during that period because the person has paid that.
A new period would be set.
Okay, so B1 sub 2 is specifically authorizing a landlord to terminate a rental agreement for repeated late payment of rent, which is more than 3 times in a 12-month period.
We have the whole bill.
Yes.
You have it in pieces because there isn't
We have it as
Yeah.
passed out of the 2 committees or jurisdictions.
4.1.
Then it's a major change to the related.
So you have the
We have
report.
4.1.
I can do that if you'd like. Let me see if I have it.
So what we're walking through is the report of the committee. Okay, this is the most comprehensive that the bill was when it first came out of the first committee. It has been amended at least 3 times since then. And there are 3 more amendments that are being proposed. So I don't have a document to give you right now.
Agreed, but
This is today, it's on the floor.
right now,
For the minutes.
For third reading.
for third reading. That's why he may disappear at any moment.
They're still on announcements.
They're still in it.
We have a house.
It's okay, they do a lot of our work for us, but by doing some of that. So we're at the top of page 8.
Yes. So,
No,
oh, okay.
Oh, David, I'm sorry.
Sounded like you're just.
Oh, okay, okay. Love it. love it.
Yeah,
Okay, so what this would allow is again, if payment is late more than 3 times in a 12-month period, the landlord will be able to move forward with terminating the rental agreement under this new statutory language. What is late? What is the time period of late payment? And the section provides here in subdivision C on page 8, lines 5 and 6. Late payment of rent means payment of rent more than 10 days after the rent is due. So if the tenant's paying rent late more than 10 days, 3 times within a 12-month period, the landlord can move forward with terminating this agreement. Page 8, there is an addition of this sub 3. where a tenant's refusal to allow a landlord or a landlord's agent access to the dwelling unit would be a justification to terminate the rental
So
agreement.
the damage you got, we already talked about.
I haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
And so access is required in section 4460. And last time I was here, we talked about when access has to be allowed and under what circumstances. So there is a section that covers that. So this would allow a landlord to terminate if a tenant refuses to allow access.
And sorry,
Okay.
I'm missing C where
What line are you?
is,
Page
yeah.
8, lines 1 and 2.
Oh, you're right, it's top, okay, that's fine, that's,
Okay, so for these types of terminations, for failure to comply with material terms of the agreement, for repeated late payment of rent, for refusal to allow access, the proposal, look at lines 4, is to reduce the termination notice period from 30 days to 21 days.
if they have failed to comply with the first two.
If they have failed to do one of those things, give access, repeated late payment of rent, breach of material terms. Okay. Now we're on B2. Current law says that if termination is being based on criminal activity, illegal drug activity, or acts of violence, any of which threaten the health or safety of other residents. So it has to be criminal activity that threatens the health or safety of other people. It has to be illegal drug activity that threatens the health or safety of other people. It has to be any act of violence which threatens the health or safety of other people. This is changing that slightly to say, removing the specific reference to criminal activity or the illegal drug activity. And it just states, if this were to pass, when termination is based on acts of violence, damage to the dwelling unit, or other activity, any of which threatens the health or safety of other residents, and then adding in the landlord, the landlord's agent, or neighbors. So it could be neighbors on
Yeah,
adjacent
you could be
property.
threatening neighbors, you could be threatening a landlord.
I'm just make sure you're aware that that's not just other individuals in the dwelling unit itself. So it's activity, but the activity must threaten the health or safety of other residents, landlord, neighbors, and that is a requirement under the current statutory framework. So there's not a significant change in that regard. It is adding in other activity. So it's removing the reference to criminal or illegal activity, and it's adding in other activity, which one could interpret as broadening what someone could terminate for. However, the activity does have to threaten the health or safety of other people. So making sure you all are
Still
aware.
very broad.
I'm not going to disagree. That is, those are policy decisions for you.
Right,
So if I could,
Yes,
just to keep context on this, I see that criminal activity, illegal drug activity has been struck. But what is the current language on the notice of termination? How many days?
Yes, so there, right there on lines 12, the perfect question, segueing right into currently, the landlord has to provide 14 days notice if the landlord is terminating the rental agreement under this section because of that type of activity.
Right.
And this proposal would reduce it to 5 days.
I get all that,
Okay.
but criminal activity, illegal drug activity has been struck. So what paragraph does the termination notice for those two activities?
they're included
It would
under
be-
other
it-
activities.
Yes, it would just be, it would be kind of subsumed into the wording on lines 8 and 9 or other activity that threatens the health or safety of other residents.
But what if it doesn't threaten the health and safety? It's criminal activity, it's illegal drug activity, but it doesn't threaten anybody. What's the termination?
You would have to terminate, you potentially could terminate under the B1, which would be 21 days. For example, if in your lease term, it says you shall not, use illegal drugs on the property, right? And you find out the individual is using illegal drugs on the property, but it's not threatening anyone.
Got it.
Yes,
That's what.
yes, sir.
Okay, very good.
Oh, damn.
Okay. So as I mentioned, termination under B2 going from 14 to 5 days. Now, another slight change is on line 14. This is currently listed as 2B. The bill has moved this to a 2-3. So just moving of where this language would exist. It says that the actual notice required shall be accompanied by an affidavit setting forth particular facts and basis thereof in support of the termination with sufficient detail to inform the tenant of the reasoning behind the termination.
Sorry, where are you now?
Lines 14 through 17 on page 8.
Okay,
So if you're terminating for under the subsection B, so it's either because of a violation of the material terms of the rental agreement, or it's because it's some activity that's threatening other people, either of those, B1 or B2, the landlord has to provide an affidavit to the tenant as part of the termination notice that they provide. And it has to include particular facts and the basis thereof with sufficient detail to inform the tenant of the reasoning behind the termination. Okay, now we get to sub 3. Landlord shall not terminate a rental agreement under this subsection based on a person seeking medical assistance for a drug overdose, being the subject of a good faith request for medical assistance, or being at the scene of a drug overdose or within close proximity, as provided in 18 VSA 4254. And evidence obtained from the good faith request for medical assistance shall not be used in an ejectment action brought under 12 VSA chapter 169, which is the court case. Okay. Now we get into page 9. This is coming up to give or take where we were last Friday. A and B are what are referred to as the just cause reasons for terminating a rental agreement. You have cause that the tenant has done something that causes or gives a just cause reason to terminate the rental agreement. The remaining provisions here are kind of fall into either a gray area or more of the quote no cause reasons for terminating. Sub C is restructuring the entire section to cover circumstances where the termination exists on the day that a tenant provides notice to terminate. So that's lines 13, 14, 15. Termination is based on an intent to vacate provided by actual notice from the tenant. The landlord can terminate the rental agreement on the date provided in the notice from the tenant. Tenant says, I'm terminating the rental agreement the 30th day of the month, and the landlord can say, terminating the rental agreement on the 30th day. Next. If termination is based on compliance with a government order, then the termination of the rental agreement is on the date provided in the government order. That's on
Can you give an example?
20.
Yeah, what's an example of that?
Could be condemning of a building because it's not habitable to live in.
So it could be a town, an ordinance that had been violated that,
Eminent domain.
or eminent domain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, now we're moving to page 10. Currently, subsection D covers the circumstances where the property is being sold. I'm a landlord. I'm selling the property, and part of the contract of sales is that there's no rental agreements in place. Current statutory notice period is 30 days. So you're selling the property, you have to provide 30 days notice to the individuals living there. If it's in the absence of a written rental agreement. If you have a written agreement, then you can't terminate it during the period that you have the written rental agreement in place. If you don't have a written rental agreement, so you're on a month to month, right? Then the landlord has to provide 30 days if they're going to sell the property.
But good enough.
Yeah.
You said that again about if there's a written lease, rental agreement, and buildings being sold or repurposed, that the tenants stay in during the duration of their
For the written period, yes, sir.
This is a change or this is current?
This could be a change. Actually, no, it would keep the same.
They have patterns.
Excuse me. Okay. One thing I wasn't able to bring with me today, but we had talked about last time, if you all recall, I mentioned that there are multiple different notice periods depending on primarily two things. Is there a written agreement? Is there not a written agreement? And second, has the person been there for 2 years or more, or has the person been there for 2 years or less? Depending on those circumstances, the termination period could be 30 days, could be 60 days, could be 90 days. Under this current section, if you have a written agreement, then the landlord has to provide 30 days before the expiration of the written agreement if they're selling the property and you will no longer be able to live there. If there is no written agreement, then it has to be 30 days at any point in time.
We'll do a
The
little chart
change
for
is-
people so that this could be.
The change is keeping that distinction, but moving it to 90 days. So it's 90 days before the end of the written rental agreement, if one exists.
If
Or it's just 90 days at whatever point the notice is provided.
Thomas.
So if I'm under the impression when I had a couple of rents, when I used to rent, I did a 1-year lease. Now, is it standard practice that you do a 1-year lease and then that's the end of it? And it's just most often you're then no longer on contract and it's just month to month? Or is it just as common that leases are 1 year with the option to renew 1 year, option to renew 1 year with the actual?
That is more common.
I don't know which one is more common,
Yeah.
but depending on what you do under current law will then dictate how much notice period you have to provide to the tenant. What I mean by that is, let's just take the scenario where the person has been there for 2 years or longer, because that under current law has the longest notice periods built in. Okay. You have a written agreement. You have a written agreement for the first year. You have a written agreement for the second year. You have a written agreement for the third year. You can't terminate the agreement until the expiration of the written term.
Yeah,
And if they've been there for 2 years, you have to provide them 60 days notice.
Okay.
Now let's take the example where no agreement is, the agreement's not in writing.
Yeah.
You have it in writing for the first year. And then you just go month to month after that. Second year passes. Now you're in year 3. Landlord wants to terminate for no reason. You don't have to wait till the expiration of the agreement because there isn't one in writing at that point.
Yeah.
But because the person's been there for longer than 2 years, you have to give them 90 days notice.
that would fill those, what is current?
That's
Yeah,
current.
Current.
Yeah, that's current law. But now the one, I mean, there are several pluses here, but the plus for tenants here, the landlord has to give a reason for why they are terminating.
Well,
I guess that it's being sold or it's being repurposed.
the landlord has to tell the tenant why
Yeah.
why the agreement is being terminated, but the language that's coming out of the house currently still allows for the quote, no cause eviction. So it doesn't remove that. It doesn't
We still
provide.
have these few cases where it could be no cause without being clear about repurposing or selling.
So keep in mind, under the no cause, you're going to quote, no cause eviction, a landlord doesn't need a reason to remove you from the rental. There's, as long as they comply with the notice requirements, the landlord has no obligation to have a reason. to terminate.
But we've added a bunch of sort of just cause.
You've added some changes to the just cause reasons, but the bill as it currently exists still proposes to keep the quote, no cause reasons.
Cause.
Current law with your law, 90 days.
Yes.
Okay, but what I read here is current law is that when a property is sold, it's 30 days.
Correct. So
Okay.
it reduces the notice period.
So current law is if you're selling the building, you can give 30
So it's kind of a
days.
carve out, right? It's saying that if it's for no cause, so for no reason, you just want the person gone. And they've been there for 2 years, could be up to 90 days. But we will have an exception under sub D to say that if you're going to sell the building, we're not going to make you comply with that extensive notice timeframe. We're going to shorten the notice timeframe to 30 days.
Is that common in other states when buildings are sold to give 3 months?
I would need to go do some research on that. I don't know what other states have as it relates to that specific provision.
And then a question I guess I'll have for the admin.
Yeah, we'll pin it. We'll put a pin in on that.
How often are buildings sold and how often do you have to eject the tenants versus can you sell a building and want to keep and honor those? So I'd like to get a better idea of how
So-
frequent this is.
Peter, that would be a question for the realtors, and that would be interesting. Now, after COVID, Thomas, in our neck of the woods, I don't know about South Burlington, but we saw a number of buildings in the Upper Valley that were sold after COVID. And we had a lot of evictions or and if you don't have at least 90, I mean, you need time to get an apartment in a market with no vacancies.
I agree, but I just want to know when that happens, is it more frequently that they are basically updating these buildings which are 70 years old with new HVAC systems, and if there's no
Right.
path to do it that way, is it a bad thing that we're updating our housing stock? So
No, I think it's not a bad thing. Challenge is, what do we do with the tenants while that's happening?
Yep.
And where do they go? So, for example, we have an older person's community in Woodstock, Mellishwood. The Twin Pines, the affordable housing, our affordable housing partners are updating and rebuilding that, but the much better it's gonna be. They've had to rehouse them in that time in between. So there's a whole range of responsible landlord tenant.
So when I go back very, very quickly to one of the questions from Senator Chipman, I mean, it's whether to have a written agreement in place. It's gonna be up to the parties. There are protections that are afforded to them if they have it. The tenant would have protection that the landlord couldn't terminate the written agreement for no cause until the end, if it's in writing. You can't terminate a written agreement for no reason in the middle of it. There you have to meet some other reason for termination, just cause reason, you'd have to sell the property, etc. So the tenant would at least have the protection that they could remain in the unit during the period of the written agreement. The notice periods are longer under current law if there is no written agreement. So you have shorter notice periods if you're the landlord under the written agreement, but you would have to wait till the expiration of the agreement. Separate from that, there was one other thing I was going to mention about the having it right, but it slipped me. Excuse me.
Okay, but so then I'm going to be also curious, and this might be for you, Cam, is there an abuse of this carve out where that if an owner says, I'm selling the place, get out, but then they don't sell the place and they use it as is that something that we're also trying to address here? And are there protections for the lease?
That's a good question.
There is a section.
We just lost you, Ken.
Yes, I'm pulling something up. There's a section,
It seems like this bill's guarding against a lot of different circumstances, so I'm just kind of curious about that it's already populated. Sections.
there is a section related to illegal evictions. There's a protection for tenants for illegal evictions. I don't know that the statutory language is going to cover that scenario exactly, but conceivably a tenant could go after a landlord for damages if they had to vacate a property that the landlord was knowingly utilizing that section to terminate a, agreement to get someone out. But keep in mind, it is conceivably or conceptually, I don't know that a landlord would do that. What I mean by that is if you have a written agreement, current statutory section or language says that you need to provide the tenant 30 days or 60 days notice before the expiration of the written agreement for no cause eviction. And so to sell the building, it only shortens the time frame by a maximum of 30 days. So I don't know that a landlord would go through the hoop of trying to make that argument just to get someone out when the notice is only shortened by a month.
But if they're financing or if their buyer's financing, rates are only locked in for 30 days, so I can see how that could be an issue.
But then again, right, if the landlord is, working to sell the building, they're providing the notice and then everything falls through and the individual has vacated the property in the meantime, they were concerned about the landlord possibly going through an ejectment if they stayed. So they went ahead and scrambled and left, and they got another building with less favorable terms, et cetera. And now they want to argue that, the landlord didn't sell the building, so they have been harmed. I mean, they could bring a claim against the landlord, sure, but the landlord is going to be able to point to that fact in a case like that. Well, we had financing lined up, or we had a contract for sale that fell through, et cetera. So, I mean, is it frequent that a landlord is using that provision in particular to lie knowingly to try to get someone out? Probably not. I think you'll see the argument much more frequently under the just cause reasons that a landlord may be fabricating stretching some facts about the activity that's going on that may not be threatening other people, but the landlord's claiming that it's doing to try to get someone out. Because in that instance, you can terminate the written agreement. You don't have to wait until the end of it.
As we dive deeper into this lovely subject, I just want to state, I'm not assigning malintent on landlords. There are bad landlords, there's bad tenants, and what we're trying to do is just find protection.
We're trying to, yeah.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm just making sure my computer doesn't die.
You guys.
Here, we got one right here, up
Let's
here, so we don't kill anybody, Chris.
Senator Brock, take a shot.
Thing.
Yes, we do not want to. Because I almost did that in a smoke room. There are people screaming there. Ah,
Okay,
okay,
so I'm going to bring us back to this.
yeah, let's keep going. I put a pin in that, Thomas.
So what this section is doing is it's adding that term. This is saying termination under this section when a property is sold or it's being repurposed. And it's extending the notice period from 30 to 90 days. So if you're going to
With a
sell,
written agreement.
or in either instance, if you
Okay.
have a written agreement, it would be 90 days before the expiration of the
With
written
any-
agreement. If you do not have a written agreement, it's 90 days.
Okay,
And then it says when the landlord's contracted to sell the building, when it's necessary for the landlord or a member of the landlord's immediate family to occupy the premises for a minimum of 12 contiguous months as a primary residence. If the landlord's permanently withdrawing the dwelling unit from the rental market, or if they're demolishing the unit or renovating the unit, then they have to provide 90 days. Forgive me, but I'm going to take a pause and, well, I'm going to go back to this section.
and this covers eminent domain and stuff, or is that previous?
No,
section
that would be,
government?
that would potentially be under a previous section.
Yeah, right.
This is just if you're selling the property or you're repurposing the property, what is the notice period that you need to give the tenant? And this is extending it to 90 days. Now you get to the subsection E, which is termination at the expiration of a rental agreement.
Right.
So I mentioned earlier, no cause, this is the no cause eviction section. So current law, I've mentioned a few times now, current law, it's going to depend. Do you have a written agreement? Do you not? Have they been there for 2 years or more? Have they been there for less than 2 years? Depending on those two questions will depend on how much notice the landlord has to provide. It could be 30 days, could be 60 days, could be 90 days. This section is consolidating all of that, and it's saying that if you're going to terminate the written agreement, the rental agreement for no cause, then it's 90 days regardless. So it's 90 days before the end of the written term, or if you don't have a written agreement, it's 90 days notice. And it doesn't matter how long the person has been there. Could be the first year, could be the second year, could be the 10th. It's 90 days. So it gets rid of that 30, 60, 90 distinction in the
Yeah.
current law. And it
Beautiful.
makes it all consistent in 90 days. So because of that, I will highlight something for you.
Just for clarity,
Yeah, David.
does the tenant have the same obligation that at the end of a written
Give them
contract?
To give them
They have
notice.
to give 90 days notice to the landlord so that the landlord has the opportunity to flip the, advertising for the unit, replacement of a tenant, or is this just the,
Essentially, no. There's no, a landlord wouldn't be able to hold a tenant liable for ongoing costs, in my understanding.
But the reverse,
But
here we're creating a scenario where the reverse is true.
correct.
Right.
These sections refer to the landlord terminating the agreement, not the tenant. So I would need to go, I will take it upon myself to go look, but I'm not aware of any case that would hold a tenant responsible for the same notice period at the end of a written lease term.
Some agreements do have that. I mean, I know in New York, our son who just moved apartment, if they were gonna move out, needed to let them know.
I mean, I've seen a written agreement in Vermont that says it. The question then is there a legal obligation of the tenant to do it?
It's the. I'm thinking out of context, but
This is the tenant giving the landlord notice.
right, I mean,
For this section is the landlord
Yes.
giving the tenants notice
Sure.
if they've sold for 50.
right, I mean. It only exists if the tenant would like to enjoy the ongoing privilege of living on those premises. So, and I don't say privilege in that context, but there are places in, especially New York City, which I don't think we want to emulate, but certainly Burlington, where you would be required to let your landlord know if you did intend to stay, because they have to start doing showings.
Exactly. And often they would ask 2 months before.
So that's written into rental agreements because it doesn't have to exist everywhere if the landlord, the landlord's really the one who's supposed to provide notice. The tenant, it would just be kind of a courtesy back and forth if you
But
want.
landlords can ask for that. So Thomas.
Yes,
Tenants, really, by my expectation, what I remember, but you have to give 30 days notice. You can't just say, I'm done today and I'm not paying any more rent. Isn't that standard protocol that you have to give 30 days notice that you're moving out? And then they still pay rent for those 30 days?
So it's gonna depend on the circumstance.
Right.
What I mean by that is if you have a written agreement and the tenant abandons the property in the middle of the written term, then in theory, the landlord could go after the tenant who would remain obligated to pay
Right,
rent
pay
during
through
the
the end of the
period
lease.
unless the landlord was able to find someone else to take over. However, there's a difference between the landlord could do that. Would they do it? Could be very difficult to find someone, take them to court, as opposed to just going to find another tenant.
So, yeah.
That is conceivable. But so think about it. You have the written agreement and it expires at the end of a 12-month period. The tenant is still obligated to pay that last month. So they pay the last month and then you're asking, are they obligated to give any sort of notice after that? And I would say no. The landlord is aware at that point that the lease agreement expires at the end of that month. So in theory, the landlord is on notice that that's the end. And so I'm not aware, and I would posit the others that are going to come testify, they are aware of something to make you aware of it. I'm not aware of anything in the statute that mandates that a tenant provide the landlord some sort of notice that they will not renew the term. The lease agreement could say it, and I've seen them say that. And it may be ideal for the tenant to do that, hey, let the landlord know, I want to renew lease terms.
Or not.
I think a best practice for a landlord would be to engage with the tenant early, right? If you have to provide a 60-day notice that you're not going to renew, I'm the landlord, I'm going to the tenant at the, 70th day or 75th day, whatever it is, and saying, are you renewing? If you are renewing, here's the written term, you're going to sign it. And if you're not going to sign it, then I'm going to give you a termination notice. That way I'm covering my bases to be able to bring in another tenant. That I think would be like a best practice for a landlord to do that.
So just, Mr. Chair, if I may continue, I would just say, I would love to hear from the advocates on that too, because my impression is that you you can put you often in leases is you have to give 30 days notice because that just makes sense. Also, just for reputational purposes, if you want to get a rented or somebody else to rent you in another place, you want to be able to refer to your previous landlord and just poof and disappear and leave that landlord in the lurch, not knowing that they had to rent the place. So, but that's where the advocates come in.
And again, I agree. I think if you're, intending to use that rental experience as a reference potentially in the future, it would probably be in your best interest to do that. But, I would think about it similarly in the labor context. As an employee, I'm not legally obligated to give my employer any notice that I'm leaving.
Want a good reference? You do.
Exactly. Right. That's what I'm saying. Practically, it may be smart of me to do that, but there's not a legal obligation that I see.
If I could, so can we go back one paragraph? Because
So I'm just dealing with our agenda because
paragraph D, starting in line 14, same page 10. We didn't, I don't remember you really hitting this section hard, and I'm curious about the renovations exceeding 50% of a rental unit's value. I'm gonna go back to Senator Chitten's example of HVAC renovations, which can make a unit uninhabitable. If a renovation makes it uninhabitable, whether it's 10% or 90%, curious where this language came from and what its purpose is.
Thank you for mentioning this because I wanted to come back to this section for,
so sorry, where are we? Which page?
we're on page 10, looking at subsection D, starting on line 14.
Yeah.
And Senator, I don't mean to speak for you, but I think the question is about it's allowing a landlord to take a unit offline for renovations that are required, and it has a threshold of the renovations exceed 50% of the rental unit's value. And the question is, why is it at 50%? Because renovations that are substantial may not be 50% of the rental unit's value, but may still require the unit to be vacant in order to
Still make the unit unlivable. Right.
So here is a potential an issue with these two sections in play together, the D about repurposing of the unit and the subsection E, which is about no cause eviction. This is a structural problem that I raised to the committee, the House committee, and they did not do anything with it at that point in time.
But we could.
You could.
Yeah.
Currently, as I mentioned, there are different notice periods for different reasons. Do you have a written agreement? Do you not, et cetera, et cetera? You can have a shorter notice period if you're selling the property. The current statute doesn't say anything about renovating the building, right? That doesn't even exist. So this is new. Because sub D is giving 90 days notice for these reasons, and sub E is giving 90 days notice for these reasons, I don't know of any landlord that would ever give a termination notice under D if I can give you a termination notice under E with the same time frame, and I don't have to give you a reason. Do you follow me? Why am I going to go through the process of making an argument that I need to refurbish the dwelling unit, and that's why I'm giving you a termination notice, if all I have to do is give you a termination notice under E and I don't have to give you a reason at all? And so I think that's a fundamental issue that you all may want to address. If you think that providing a shorter notice period because someone needs to refurbish the dwelling unit is appropriate policy, then I think having a question about whether a 50% threshold is important. I don't know where the 50% came in. I don't know, I was not in the room where there was any lengthy discussion.
I wonder if
about
that
whether
other state, and that may
50%
be based on other law.
could be. I was asked to put it in and I don't remember. there
But
being
it makes
significant
some
discussion
sense
about
for
that.
somebody to know a couple things, the renter, that they would want to know, they'd want notice, and they'd want to know how the duration of the renovation so that they could find substitute,
Well, one,
staying with a friend or doing something.
and one other key provision that I was going to point out in this subsection is the fact that if you're renovating the unit, the landlord must, there on line 16, must give the tenant the first right, right of first refusal to reoccupy the property. That was included.
Right,
So
that's-
if
that's
you all
great.
want to, if you want to keep this type of provision in, just know that that's also a requirement.
So there are a couple things would want to know as we further. Thank you, Ashley. Sorry, we're way behind. Good luck on the floor.
Thank you.
Also the requirement, if somebody's going to be refurbishing an apartment, and the tenant's expected back, is there any obligation of the landlord to help pay for the accommodation in between?
Not in this bill, there was discussion and that requirement exists in some of the other bills that were introduced that are in-house general that they reviewed together. There was a requirement that if you're going to remove someone because you're refurbishing the location, you need to provide some sort of reasonable,
Accommodation, financial accommodation.
Right,
I
right,
think
which they
that
discussed
makes-
potentially as just being a month's rent, but that does exist in some of the bills that have been introduced.
I'm putting a pin in it. It strikes me as something this whole section needs to be, for us to spend more time on.
So-
Bill,
No, the bill is gonna take us, this is the thorniest bill we're gonna deal with this half of the session.
should look us up.
I said that in chairs the other day. Everybody's going around saying, oh, we're all gonna have such a great spring. No serious challenging bills coming our way. It's like, oh, we have one. I don't know why anybody else. I
Just
feel-
curiosity, is the House also sending us an economic development bill?
No, their
Some
only
serious-
economic development bill is sister state.
What? Wait,
No,
I'm talking about like, moving the boundaries.
Commerce has sent us sister state. That is, they haven't sent us consumer protection bills. They've sent us. some other things.
oh,
We've data private, I mean,
Yeah.
the Gen X private.
I don't think they are sending an economic development.
You
They're
asked
working
about-
on CTE this.
You asked about
You're right.
strictly economic development, all they're sending us so far is sister state. We initiated the economic development, and they're very excited about building on it.
So circling back here, we are on page 11, lines 11. Sort of one line, okay. Termination notice, this is just a section that's saying, the date has to be specifically stated in the notice, and then there's addition of, as well as the reason for the termination. If you remember from the insertion way above, where if it is for a just cause under the sub B, the landlord has to provide the particular facts with specific information. So it's just a corresponding change here. You have subsection G, it's current statute, conversion to a condominium. There's an entire chapter in Title 27 about what needs to happen if a building is being converted to condominiums.
To your point earlier,
Yeah.
Chair, a graphic on these different would be very helpful.
I
What
think we
really-
definitely have to work on a graph for the 2 years, the 60, the notice days, the written agreements, the non-written agreements, like, right,
And that is on me. I hope to have.
no,
I
we're
would
happy to
submit
help.
In time. I would submit that it needs to be as is and projected or recommended or whatever, because everything's moving here.
Yeah.
We need to know where it currently sits and where it's being recommended.
And then also current law. Just.
That's what I mean by as is.
Yep, well, we're gonna get it, because I think that's gonna help us a lot.
So the sub H here on the bottom of page 11, moving to the top of page 12, this is about shared occupancy. When the rental dwelling unit exists in the landlord's home, then the notice period, currently it's 15 days. So this is the literal bottom of page 11, top of 12. 15 days if it is a monthly rental, and 7 days if it's weekly. And the proposal here is to strike 15 and make it 7, whether it's a monthly or a weekly. There was discussion about whether weekly rentals exist, and there was some testimony that very rare, but they do exist. And so, regardless, this would strike that distinction and just make it 7 days.
Great, and this addresses home share, shares are.
Could be an example. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, everybody, yeah.
So subsection I is about when multiple notices are provided. It's nothing changing but it is just a point to mention as you're walking through. A landlord could proceed with multiple terminations at the same time. So for example, a landlord may want to proceed with a termination because the individual is not paying rent, but also proceed with a termination based on a no cause reason. That way, if the non-payment of rent is unsuccessful, they still potentially have the other termination notice to move forward in an ejectment action. So it is conceivable. We have payment after termination. So this is saying that a landlord who is accepting payment of rent, even after you've provided a notice of terminate, doesn't result in dismissal of an action being brought. So you're terminating the agreement because you're arguing that the tenant is breaching some material term of the written rental agreement. The tenant continues to pay you during that period. You accepting that payment doesn't negate your ability to move forward with the termination. Okay, subsection K on page 13 requires that a landlord commence an ejectment action not later than 60 days after the termination date in the notice. There's no change there, no substantive change in the section. I'm just bringing it up so you're aware of it because we're going to talk about ejectment action shortly. You give a termination notice, you have 60 days to bring the ejectment action. This new subsection here, affirmative defense to an ejectment action. For any ejectment action based on a failure to pay rent, it shall be an affirmative defense. Judgment shall be issued for the defendant if there exists a serious health and safety code violation issued to the landlord under 20 VSA 2677. That is the section where you all provided the Division of Fire Safety with the legal authority to enforce against habitability issues for residential dwelling units. So if the landlord's been issued the citation and the landlord has made no reasonable attempt to correct the violation as of the date of the termination. So why is this here? Currently, there's a separate section that requires the landlord to provide, a habitable living space. The section doesn't have a lot of information in it as far as what is habitable, but pull it up and review together. I'll review two sections with you. Landlord obligations, habitability. In any residential rental agreement, the landlord shall be deemed to covenant and warrant to deliver over and maintain throughout the period of the tenancy premises that are safe, clean, fit for human habitation, and comply with the requirements of applicable building, housing, and health regulations. The Division of Fire Safety has issued a code that documents what standards have to be met for habitability. The only thing that this section talks about is heat and hot water in subsection C, but there's a lot more that goes into that, okay? So the landlord has to have a habitable place, has to provide and maintain a habitable dwelling. What happens if they don't? You go to the next section.
Then the health and safety inspectors can come.
Yes, but also a tenant can withhold rent for the period of non-compliance. The tenant can obtain injunctive relief. They can take the landlord to court and get an order that the landlord must fix the habitability issue. The tenant can recover damages or terminate the rental agreement. So a tenant can withhold rent because of a violation where the landlord is failing to make repairs within a reasonable time. That's what the current statutory section there says. This new language here is saying that if a landlord moved forward with a termination and an ejectment action for your failure to pay rent because there is this violation.
Because it's uninhabitable.
Because it doesn't have to be uninhabitable, it's just there's a violation that the landlord has been cited for and the landlord hasn't taken the reasonable steps to fix it, then it is a defense in the ejectment action. I would argue that protection already exists. If if you're withholding rent under the section that authorizes you as
You're
a tenant to withhold rent, and then a landlord terminates the agreement and brings an ejectment action, and then the tenant points to that section and says, I'm legally authorized to withhold rent because you haven't corrected the violation. A court is going to review that and likely to find that, no other contrary facts exist, then, the tenant has that right as it is now. But this is putting it in the section regarding termination notice to make it clear and explicit for tenants, for landlords. If there is a violation that has been issued to the landlord by the Division of Fire Safety, and the landlord hasn't taken reasonable attempts to correct the violation, and they bring the ejectment action, it is a defense, and the ejectment will be dismissed. This
We're on
is,
page 13,
yes, bottom of page 13, top of
number
page
1.
14. And it gives a list of what those violations could be. And then the last thing I'll mention, because this is the last part of this section, is the sub 2 on lines 10 through 13, page 14. The remedy under that subsection, the defense against the ejectment action, will not defeat the ejectment if the violation was caused by the negligent or deliberate act or omission of the tenant or a person on the premises with tenant consent. So if the violation is because of something that the tenant has done to cause the violation, then the tenant can't use that as a defense in the ejectment action.
You can't go puncturing the
You
hot
can't
water
stop
tank.
paying rent, right? You can't do the damage, stop paying rent because of the
You can't
damage,
benefit from
and
damage you
then-
caused.
and then subsequently have it as a defense in an ejectment action.
Right, Dave?
When we get into this, it doesn't have to be a now and today thing. It's, so I want to make sure, because this is a new section, that when we rub up against the 90-day notice for renovation, when the landlord is trying to improve the health
Right.
and safety aspects, that we don't somehow create a 90-day gap where the tenant can begin to pepper the landlord with issues which are already known by the landlord, so they stop paying rent for the 90 days. And I just want to make sure that the balance here is correct, that well, in one case, we need a 90-day advance notice. In another case, we potentially allow the tenant to stop paying rent for
Got it.
violations.
Okay. Moving to the next section, and then we're gonna start talking about ejectment.
Okay, so we're moving
So I'm
line
on
14,
line 16.
line 16, right?
On
Termination.
page 15. The lines 14 and 15 are just saying that subsection applies to 10 BSA chapter 153 related to mobile homes, 11 BSA chapter 14 related to cooperative housing arrangements and or corporations, and then 12 BSA chapter 169, which is the ejectment chapter. So it's making it applicable, the defense, the ejectment, it's making it applicable in a mobile home park and in a cooperative housing corporation services. Okay. Termination of tenancy and action for possession. This is amending this section to allow a landlord to bring an ejectment under subsections A and B. So if you remember, this is for non-payment of rent or for the tenant breach of the terms of the written rental agreement, doesn't have to be in writing. Then the landlord can bring the ejectment under this new process that we're about to talk about and walk through. Okay. Before I get there, I just want to pause because I want to make sure I haven't missed any of the amendments are related to that section, and I don't think I have. Actually, yes, I missed one.
Yeah,
Yep.
which is,
So, let me pull it up. I missed actually a big one, so forget.
It's already passed, or that's.
That has passed. That is part of the amendment, is part of the bill at this point in time. There was some concern about individuals who may be the victim of a domestic violence stalking or sexual assault. And so if you remember, we're gonna go all the way back to the termination of the rental agreement because of acts of violence against someone. Right here, sub 2. So if you remember, we talked about when termination is based on acts of violence, damage to the dwelling unit, or other activity which threatens the health or safety of other residents, landlord, the landlord's agent, or neighbors, then the landlord can terminate the written agreement, the rental agreement in 5 days. There was some concern that was being discussed before, as the bill was being passed out of the first committee, and some concern that was talked about in the Judiciary Committee. And so there was an amendment that was proposed on the floor that was ultimately adopted. There was concern about tenants who are in the unit that may be a victim of, as I said, some sort of domestic abuse, stalking, or sexual assault. That could be from another tenant.
Sorry, what page? I apologize. We have a timeline challenge here.
Page 8, going all the way back up where we're talking about termination of the agreement because of activity that is threatening the health or safety of other people.
Right.
And there was concern that there could be situations where the tenant is the victim of a domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking. And the policy discussion of ensuring that that victim is not
Is it punished
having
by
their,
eviction?
right, the victim is not having their rental agreement terminated
Because
because of being the victim of that instance of violence. And so there was a section that was added in right here. You may have this in front of you, you may not. This is one of the amendments that was reviewed the other day. So it would add into that subsection B, this language, this new subdivision 5 ABC, which says that a landlord shall not terminate a rental agreement of a tenant under the subsection because the tenant is the victim of an incident or pattern of domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking. The landlord shall allow a tenant who is the victim of domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking committed by another tenant or lawful occupant to bifurcate the rental agreement as authorized in section 4472A, which is coming up. And the landlord may terminate the rental agreement under subdivision 2 for a tenant who has committed an act of domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking against another tenant, if the act poses an actual and imminent threat to the remaining tenants, other residents, landlord, landlord's agent, or neighbors. There is no other action to be taken that would reduce or eliminate the threat.
David,
So can you take us or just tell us a section that how many days notice do they have to give, or is it like a 0-day notice?
So
that may be immediate.
it is going into the subsection B. Subsection B talks about if you terminate the agreement because of a violation of the terms of the agreement, it reduces it to 21 days. Or if you're terminating the agreement because of some sort of act of violence, then it's 5 days. So presumably under this section, then, if the landlord is bifurcating the agreement because one tenant has committed an act of domestic abuse, sexual assault, or stalking against another tenant, you can bifurcate the agreement, and then the landlord could terminate the rental agreement of the abuser. And the landlord would argue, most likely, it's under one of those two sections. So presumably you're doing it because it's an act of violence against someone else, and you're doing it in accordance with 5 days.
If you use the term of the chair, Madam Chair, I would submit that we put a pin in this one.
Yeah.
Because this is pretty significant.
Yeah, but
And so
we
I
have
will,
at least too much case law. I mean, and there are so many examples of this.
the things I will point out here are the threshold is potentially higher to eject the abuser. If you look at subsection B2, it talks about activity that threatens the health or safety of other residents. That's how you can terminate under that section. This says that the landlord can terminate if the act poses an actual and imminent threat. So somewhat of a different standard. And the actual and imminent threat is defined up above, which has been added to the bill as physical danger that is real, would occur within an immediate time frame, and could result in the death or serious bodily harm. I'm just pointing out to you, so you're aware as you're moving this forward, there
Right.
would be a slightly different threshold there if the landlord was going to move forward to eject the abuser because they're claiming it's an act of violence. They would need to successfully potentially defend in court that the activity was posing an actual and imminent threat.
So do we not require a review, a release from abuse order?
You would not, no. It would potentially be
Because that's
evident
important.
in support, but the statutory section wouldn't require there to be a relief in order to move forward, bifurcate the agreement and eject one of the other tenants. No.
So there's no legal.
This,
Yes,
this is, yeah, I mean, this
gets.
gets, to another area of law. I happen to have practiced it. I spent a lot of time doing relief from abuse orders, and while we, in other areas of law, we don't want to say that someone needs a relief from abuse order, to enjoy other employment privileges, etc. This is an area of the law where, you often have to get a relief from abuse order to keep that person 500 feet away from you, to give them the opportunity to get their possessions from the home with some kind of third party. So a relief from abuse order is actually the only place where you can really work some of this out without getting criminal conditions of release for somebody. So
Yeah, so that's why I'm sort of, anyway, I'm sort of surprised it wasn't. So we're putting a pin in this. This is a big discussion, Tom.
One thing I would say, when this gets through the House, I would love if we walk through the final version of it and then just do one thing that I think would, because this is a complicated bill. I did it in transportation with the T bill a lot. We could go through and just sort of mark sections that we're fine with,
Yep.
so that we can just,
Okay,
as a
absolutely.
committee, be like, these are the
I'm
sections.
trying to
we're gonna
put
focus
pins in
on.
as we
Yeah.
go on.
and I know
It's
this,
like a section by section grid, as Anthea used to do it. It was really nice that we would have the
Oh,
section by
yeah,
section
yeah.
of what each unit did, and then we'd be like, green that we're good, and then otherwise we can just come back. Because I see a lot of pins, and I'm.
Nope, I got it.
I say this knowing it's also a dangerous thing to do, and it's totally up to you, Madam Chair, but I need to hear from the recorder or a representative of the committee how they got to all of these.
We are gonna hear from Mark again after we go.
Section by section.
Yeah.
I mean, really, I can't, I don't know where I begin with just saying like, what are we?
I'm happy. Mark has
Yeah.
offered.
Yeah.
Mark has offered as the chair
Mhm.
and as the inspiration behind this bill. I mean, I've worked with him too, but it's really his baby. Go through a section by section once it's the full passage. So let's keep going and we will have that. Exactly. Good. I've already asked.
Okay.
I've already asked. Great minds. We're thinking alike.
I will just comment that the definitions here, domestic abuse, sexual assault and stalking, refer back to the abuse prevention order section.
So we're back on page 14. Are we still on that?
I'm still in this amendment because there's one other thing I need to point out to you. So as I mentioned, the landlord cannot terminate the rental agreement under this circumstance and bifurcate, and that's the piece I will comment. There is a new section being added in subchapter 4 of the chapter governing rental agreements, and it allows or it would require the landlord to bifurcate a rental agreement to eject, remove, or terminate the individual who is the abuser. And then in sub B, it requires the landlord to provide the remaining victim, the protected tenant here, a reasonable opportunity to locate additional tenants or to find new housing. And that is defined as 90-day period. So I understand you got a pen in it, so I'm gonna
Yeah.
switch back to the bill. and you. can
So
add
that's-
that, but that's the last piece I wanted to.
We would use the word eject, not, evict the party, the abuser in this case, not ejector.
Potentially, so it's got eject there on lines
Yeah,
one,
okay.
and eject on line 4. So, I've seen eviction used somewhat interchangeably with eject, but the
So what
formal-
eject is immediate. I mean, that would be, have an
No.
immediate thing.
um,
Anyway, we'll come back to it. Let's come back to it. Okay. We have about 15 minutes left.
okay,
20.
we are,
We were on
we're on,
Fif-
yes.
Uh, 14 or 15, bottom of 14.
Page 15, yeah, yeah, so. We've talked, everything up until now is about the residential rental agreement. And how a landlord goes about terminating the residential rental agreement. Now we're gonna switch gears and talk about the ejectment process. So a landlord provides the termination notice. The individual tenant remains on the property after the termination notice date. The date provided in the termination notice. So the landlord has to bring an ejectment action in court in order to get a writ of possession to have the individual removed from the property.
So this ejectments occur when they do not have a written agreement.
It could be a written agreement or not. This is,
Sorry.
ejectment is the formal process of going to court to get a court order to remove the tenant from the property if the court deems that the individual should be removed.
So the point I raised earlier is that as I've been trying to read up on this, I see other states often separate, distinguish those terms. We do not. I don't know if
And we are doing that here.
No. We're
We
just
have a whole
blurring
section on
eviction
eject.
and ejectment. They're the same to us.
Under Vermont law, very simply,
Okay, fine.
you have a tenant who lives in a dwelling unit. You have a written agreement, you don't have a written agreement, doesn't matter. You are terminating the rental agreement with the individual. You have to have a reason for doing that. As we've talked, it could be non-payment of rent, it could be for no cause. You've terminated the rental agreement. The person stayed after the date that was provided in the termination notice. Now, you as the landlord want to physically have that person removed from the property because they have remained on it after you terminated the agreement. How do you do that? Some states, you very quickly go to court, you say, hey, I terminated that person, and they say, okay, here's an order, take to the sheriff and remove the person immediately. They happen that fast. In other states, a more lengthier process. In Vermont, you have to go to court and file an ejectment action. And the court has to issue you a writ of possession, deeming that you are legally entitled to possession of the property, meaning that you have complied with the termination notice requirements in the statute. So you have the legal right of possession, not the tenant. Then they issue a writ of possession that goes to the sheriff. The sheriff issues it, serves it to the defendant, and then has to wait a statutory period. Could be 5 days, could be 7 days, could be 14 days. Then the sheriff comes back, and if the person is still there, they physically remove the person. That is the Vermont process. So there isn't a distinction between eviction and ejectment. The statutory language in Vermont is called ejectment.
So I think we have time to get into the weeds. When those occur, do they just remove the person or is it overseen that the stuff is removed here?
So it's just the person, and there is statutory language about how long the stuff has to be maintained in the property by the landlord. There's a change in there about how long the stuff has to change the locks. Yeah, the sheriff shows up, removes the person, locks are usually going to be changed right then at that point in time, and then. Okay, so ejectment. The first section here And actually, I'm not gonna walk through this. I'm gonna switch over to the judiciary amendment because the judiciary amendment was adopted. So give me half a second.
In my previous comments, just because there's so many amendments, we've lost track of the bill.
We're going to
Good
take
background.
your advice.
Yeah.
We're gonna go right through it once we're done, and Mark is gonna go with us, and if we can, side by side, through the whole thing. So
Okay.
that will be clear on the intent of each section and what the objective is.
I presume that you aren't worried about what House General passed. You just want to talk about what the bill is at this point.
Yeah, I think that's probably, it's a combination of those two things.
Understood, but so this is where I'm getting into the changes that were made by the Judiciary Committee. There were some language that was passed out of House General regarding the ejectment process, and some of those things were significantly altered by the Judiciary Committee. So I'm just going to walk through what they approved and what's in the bill right now. First, Section 12 VSA 663 is being added, say that when the landlord in an ejectment proceeding asks for alternate service of process according to the rules of civil procedure, the court shall rule on that motion promptly. That's there on line 12.
And what
Rule
is
on the
promptly?
motion promptly. It is not defined. As it came out of
We
House
should need
General,
to define promptly for appeals and Act 50.
that is
we
something
need
that
some
you all
definition here.
you all will need to speak to the judiciary about.
Right.
When it came out of House Generals, it was a specific time frame. It was 3 days.
That seems reasonably prompt.
The judiciary is going to come in and discuss with you about when you put a specific time frame on the judiciary to have to rule on a motion, you are starting to kind of stray into the judicial branches of the legal authority
That's
to
what Thomas
administer
will
their
come
own
cases,
cases.
right?
Yeah, sure. You are stepping on their separation of powers, if you will. The judicial branch.
Many of our laws create laws that their judiciary have to abide by. I think that is the odd.
So there's a distinction here, and it's a good point for me to pause and mention it. There are timeframes built in here that where you all are ordering the court to hear a motion, have a hearing on a motion
And we do
within a
have time
specific timeframe.
We
Yes,
do have time on it.
that is appropriate. If you start to switch and you say that the judiciary shall rule on certain things within a specific time frame, now you're starting to tread on core judiciary functions about when the judiciary actually has to act. And I'm not saying that you can't do it. I haven't done any exhaustive research on this separation of powers argument. I'm just letting you know that's the argument
We
that will
appreciate
be made.
Okay, let's keep going. We have 10 minutes.
Okay.
I've got him down.
So what is alternate service of process? Just very quickly, to be extremely succinct, these are things like tack orders. When you've taken someone to court in a civil proceeding, you have to have certain documents served on the other party. And there are specific ways you have to have things served. And if you are unable to serve documents on the other party in a proceeding, you can request that court authorize an alternate service of process. There is a specific rule, it's Rule 4, that governs this. And by doing so, you can then provide alternate service. Sometimes that is simply leaving the documents at physical location, known as a tack order. So what this section is doing is it's saying that when a motion is filed for an alternate service in an ejectment action, the court rules on the motion promptly. Change from what the House General passed. This is what's in the bill now. Now we're moving into the ejectment chapter in Title 12. Title 12 is about court procedure. Chapter 169 is about ejectment cases. This first section here, 4853A, payment of rent into court expedited hearing. When the plaintiff landlord brings a case, they can file a motion to have rent paid into court during the period of the ejectment case. Okay. The court can mandate that rent be paid into court, And then if the tenant fails to pay in accordance with the ruling of the court, then the court can issue for immediate possession to the landlord. It is a somewhat expedited process to potentially get to the conclusion of ejectment of the tenant. Okay, so that's why it's the landlord's asking for rent to be paid into court. Maybe you're ejecting the person because of non-payment of rent. They're not paying you rent, you terminated, you're moving to ejectment. Now you're saying, court, you order that person to make payment of rent into court. And if the person fails to do so to what the court orders, then the court can issue a writ of possession to the landlord. And it's a more expedited hearing to get to a conclusion there. That's what this section is about. There's 2 subsection A's in the current statute. Yes, that is true. There's 2. And so we're striking one of them. So we'll get down to 1.
That's good. 2 A's is a
Yes.
challenge.
A little statutory cleanup here. Okay. The key pieces here are here on subsection D and then moving to the next page.
So that we're still in the judiciary.
Still on judiciary amendment. Yeah, this is the bill.
We don't have.
This has been approved.
Right.
This has been approved as the bill.
Right.
Okay. So subsection D, as I mentioned, court finds the tenant's obligated to pay rent and is failing to do so. The court can order full or partial payment into court, current,
Right.
full or partial. The proposal here is to strike partial. So the court would only be able to order that full payment of rent be paid into court.
Why are we doing that?
I can't answer that. That's a policy
That
question for you all.
Mark will answer that for us.
So
Or
what it
Mark.
would do is it would remove the discretion from the court to be able to order partial payment at the outset, okay?
What's in that?
Yeah.
Subsection
Don't get the whole
G,
Judiciary.
subsection G allows a tenant to by motion apply to reduce the amount. Okay, that was struck at one point to remove full discretionary authority from the court and only require full payment in all instances. But the Judiciary Committee felt that that was, I guess, a step too far, and so they have kept the subsection G. So the court would have to order full payment initially, and then at any point, the tenant could come in and by motion apply to reduce that amount, and the court could reduce that amount based on the motion. But you understand that it would take steps, it would take additional steps of the defendant, the tenant, to be able to have partial payment, because initially the court would only be able to award full.
When you say steps, I hear lawyer fees, and I'm thinking the tenant, and I'm like, why are we making him have to file a motion in order for the judge to just use some discretion to say, you know what, I see these conditions, why do you, I don't know, putting a pin at this time.
Great question, and yes, sir, it could potentially lead to additional fees.
Potentially, but remember, this is a huge percentage of legal aid cases.
That
Even
doesn't-
so, it's time.
I think lawyers got enough work. I mean,
Yeah, I don't disagree.
So then you have a new language, this subsection I, which is the parties can come to an agreement at any time and apply by motion to reduce the amount. They didn't want to take the discretion. Ideally, you're trying to incentivize the parties to come to some sort of agreement as to what should be paid in, or should the case be dismissed, and should the tenant leave, or should the tenant stay? Ideally, you don't want to be taking up the court's time, right? Subsection I, parties can come to an agreement and by motion apply. Property remaining after the eviction. And here's where I was saying a second ago, sometimes in statute, they're using the word eviction instead of ejectment.
Yeah.
Currently, it says that a landlord can dispose of property after the conclusion of the ejectment action. And you have this A1 here, 15 days after the writ of possession is served, or forget immediately right now, or upon the landlord being legally restored to possession of the dwelling unit. There's some confusion about what that means, about whether the 15 days applies to the writ of possession being served, or 15 days upon the landlord being legally restored to possession of the dwelling unit. There's some confusion. We will probably need to spend a little bit of time talking about this in further detail. The change here would say that immediately upon the landlord being legally restored to possession, the landlord can dispose of the property that remains. That is a slight difference between what is under current statutory section And it's also going to depend on under what reason is the landlord being issued the writ of possession. What do I mean by that? Under a normal case, when you get to the conclusion, if the judge determines that the plaintiff landlord is entitled to possession, they issue the writ gets served by the sheriff, and the sheriff has to wait at least 14 days before they come back and physically remove the individual from the property.
After the initial.
After you serve the writ of possession, 2 weeks later, the sheriff has to wait a minimum of 2 weeks before they
Gives
can
them
come back.
to move voluntarily.
Under some provisions, that time frame is shorter. If it's because of the, it can be shorter if it's because of payment of rent into court and the tenant's failure to pay rent into court properly, or if it's an unlawful occupant. If you're removing an unlawful occupant,
Like
that
a sublet.
14 days.
A subleasee who was not allowed to be.
Correct, that could be an unlawful occupant. Then the time frame between when the writ of possession is served to when the sheriff comes back and executes could be significantly shorter. It could be 7 days. There's even proposal that it'd be 5 days. So that's the time frame to keep in mind as far as when this immediately would go into effect. It could also be longer. The court could order that it be longer. The court could order that you serve it and you have to wait 21 days. Court has that discretion. So I'm simply highlighting for you that it is a change of what is under the current statute. Is it a significant change under the current statute? It could depend on the circumstances. So.
Yeah.
It may be a good stopping point because we're going to move into the new ejectment process.
Okay, still in the judiciary, and we will have by next week, when we go through this, we will have the full bill. So we're gonna probably devote Fridays to this bill because this is one of our biggest challenges. So I think we'll probably do Friday just on this bill. That's okay with you.
Perfectly fine with me. This is what I will do in preparation for next Friday. I imagine that we can get through the remainder of the walkthrough in one more session. I will have the visual for the timeframes. I will have that for you.
Okay, a chart of,
Yes, ma'am.
right.
I will have a section by section for you.
Thank you.
Understand that it can be difficult to do a set. The section by section is going to be lengthy because I have to articulate what each section is doing, summarizing it, but I can't leave things out. So I will provide you a section by section summary, but it will be quite lengthy. And that's
given
okay,
that-
I'm just letting you know.
No, much appreciated. And given that none of us are lawyers, my plea always is with the lawyers is if you could do it in lay language, as much lay language as possible.
I will.
Because even some of our
Do my
section by
best.
sections are quite legal, which is great. It just,
Yes.
if we're gonna try and make it a useful document, help us understand.
Yeah.
Cam, thank you. This has been a huge lift on your part. You've been working on this all fall with us. We're really grateful. Thank you for all this work. And we will take this up again next Friday. I would urge us all. I am going to be sending out this weekend the landlord tenant task force summary of what they found out, which, you know, the challenges, the problem we're trying to solve is in that document. So I would encourage us all to take a peek at it. You'll remember Emily Krasnow came and presented it to us. And anyway, I'm going to email that all to you probably tomorrow. Okay?
Very good.
Great. Everybody, thank you. Thank you, all of you who are in the viewosphere, the outer limits, wherever you are. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Bye. See you next Tuesday.